This podcast episode is made possible by wowdigital.com, your trusted partner for nonprofit and charity website and design. Get ready to uncover some of the most overlooked fundraising secrets and discover how collaboration can supercharge your nonprofit's success. Welcome to the Nonprofit Digital Success Podcast. As always, I'm David, I'm the host, and in this episode, we're going to be talking all things fundraising and collaboration with Katherine Lacefield. Katherine, with over 20 years of nonprofit fundraising experience, is the founder of Just Because Consulting and the host of the Just Because podcast. Known for her mobilization skills and enthusiasm for fundraising, she focuses on the power of collab to boost revenues. Katherine, thank you so much for joining in today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's a nice Friday.
It is. All right, let's jump in and get going. So what are some of the most ignored aspects of fundraising from your experience?
So there's really two that I wanted to bring up today that I find the most annoying but most necessary things that nonprofits tend to forget. One of them is all around donation stewardship. So what I've noticed is that so many nonprofits are focused on that first donation and that they don't remember or they don't implement strategies to really build up the relationships through time. And I always make this connection to the dating world that everyone is so obsessed with getting that first date and like having the best impression, but then they forget about how do we build up that relationship to get the second date and build a long-term relationship. We're very much in like this consumerist mindset around donations that I think really needs to change so that we can build longer-term relationships, which will also lower your fundraising costs because it's been shown that retention of your donors costs a lot less than constantly acquiring new ones. And it's also much less exhausting. I've noticed so many candidates, they're like rushing out, like, have to get new donors. They're like, but what about all the donors you got last year? Like, what's happening with them? Oh, well, we'll send them an email. And I'm like, okay, we can how can we build up on that? So that's definitely something that I think needs to be worked on more. And then, of course, number two is this whole aspect of collaboration. So a lot of times we feel like the nonprofit space is all about competing with other nonprofits with similar missions or that we're competing for these donor dollars. We have to be the ones that are in front of everyone. We need to be the ones that are known for being the best in that cause. And in my opinion, this could be very toxic for the nonprofit sector because aren't we all striving to make this place a better world? You know what I mean? And by constantly fighting amongst each other, we're missing out on a lot of opportunities for collaboration that could rise up both nonprofits in different ways. So those have been the two most ignored aspects I found in fundraising of how can you mobilize your existing donors to bring yourself forward. Also, how you can mobilize your potential partners in your field or in your sector to really bring yourself up to the next level.
I love that idea of collaboration. And I think a lot of people have what I would call like a scarcity mindset around it, right? Like if you are doing this thing, whatever it happens to be, there are other organizations that are doing that. Maybe in your city, if you live in like a larger populated area or another city or another state, province, country, whatever, there's other organizations doing what you are doing, right? And if you can find a way to connect with them and make whatever the fundraising thing is that you want to do bigger because you're bringing in other people, it's going to help everybody more, right? We need that abundance mindset with all of this. And that really does help a lot.
It really does. And not only from a fundraising perspective, but from a bringing up your cause perspective. And I'm going to tell a story that I think it's so heartwarming and so cheesy, but like it really showcases the importance and potential for collaboration from both a fundraising and a cause perspective. So there was this case in Hawaii that one of my friends that works in the nonprofit space shared with me, where there was a shelter that was having a really hard time placing animals into foster care. So a lot of animals that tend to get into shelters they get sick because of the stress and they tend to get very easily treated, but very communicable diseases while they're in the shelter. So they need to be placed into temporary homes. But also by placing these animals into foster care, they're also freeing up sort of space in the shelter so that they can constantly accept more so that the euthanasia rates go down. They were having a really hard time placing these animals in foster care. And then on the other side, you had like youth protection, where they were having a really hard time placing with children that are being placed in foster families. So what they ended up doing is creating this partnership partnership between foster families for children and shelters where they actually encouraged the foster families to take in animals. And what they realized is that it helped the child understand his or her situation better by seeing this animal is stressed, kind of like me, and understanding that it was a new environment, that there was an adaptation period. And it kind of became this tool for conversation, but also for the child to not feel so alone in their situation. So from the first perspective, animals are being able to be placed into more homes. Children are being able to understand their own emotional situation and deal with their emotions in a better way. So that's just a win-win right there. But then second of all, these organizations, and I think specifically the animal shelter, because the other one was more like government services, they were able to get more fundraising and funds for this project because it was no longer just for animals. It was also helping children, which is a very popular cause. So they were able to really increase their impact, but also their fundraising potential by collaborating with a different type of organization. So for me, this is a perfect example of how opening up your eyes to how we can collaborate with not only other shelters in that case to, let's say, transfer animals into other rescues, but also human-based organizations or other types of services that can really complement the services you're offering as an organization.
I would love to have been part of the conversation around brainstorming around what they can do. And then just like a fly on the wall as that idea kind of like percolated and came to reality. That would have been amazing to be there.
Like how to figure out, like, was it an idea that popped up or was it just people were having these conversations and how they ended up building this partnership? That would be an amazing case study that I should probably look into to doing.
That'd be so cool. That'd be really cool.
100%.
I have a workshop that I run every so often. I ran it about a month and a half ago, but around how to build corporate sponsorships for profit. And it's a very similar thing, right? You need to understand your mission to align it with somebody else's mission to make sure that it works. So whether you're talking about big business, mom and pop shops, or other nonprofits, you need to really understand like where you stand and where they stand to see if it would be a good fit. And that's not to say that you both have to be doing the same thing, but if there's some kind of related cause between the two of you, then it's easier to form that collaboration.
Exactly. And the same thing can be said about grant-making organizations or foundations and even individuals. You have to try to see what bridge can we build between our two organizations or between our two entities or two people. A lot of these relationships are based on how can we like be mutual in our exchange. It's not about like we need your money because we're going to go do something great. Maybe these people or these companies or these foundations are also doing similarly good things in their communities. And then it's about like, well, working together and seeing it more as a partnership instead of a more transactional relationship, we're able to build up a stronger, longer term bond. And that kind of brings it back to also this idea of retention and stewardship of if you really want to have a long-term impact and build up these collaborations and partnerships, it can also start from a donor-donee relationship and then build up into something greater that can have much more impact.
Yeah. I mean, you can look at your large donors also. Where do they work? Maybe you can get some volunteers to help with something. It doesn't have to be money. It could be like, how can you leverage people that are part of your inner circle or concentric circles, right, however far you want to go, to help the cause in any way. And it could be a once every quarter, we're going to have you bring 5 people down to the shelter to help with this, that, or whatever, or to put food baskets, hampers, whatever you want to call it, right, together, or things like that. So I think it's really important. And one of the things that I think is also important is talking about segmentation and understanding that piece of it. So where does that flow in to fundraising, and do you think it's important or not important to do?
I think it's necessary to do. As much as we have different types of relationships in our personal life. We have our friends, we have our family, we have our work relationships. They will all be treated differently and they will all have different things that they bring to our life. And this is the same thing with your donors. Perfect example of your corporate donations. Like maybe a lot of companies are more likely to give you in-kind contributions or even gifts of their time or of their services for free. So you have to, in your database of donors or in your CRM, have a way of segmenting the different types of donations you're receiving so that you can then target them in different ways for your fundraising campaigns. So if you're doing a sponsorship and you want corporate donations, I hope that in your database, you're able to identify who has given you in the past cash donations versus in-kind. Because if historically a donor has only given you in-kind donations and you only send them cash donation opportunities, it's kind of disrespectful to what they've been giving you in the past and also much less likely to succeed. So segmentation is a necessary first step to be able to personalize your approach of donor retention so that they can continue the relationship with you and continue giving in a way that they've historically been giving, but also sometimes build it up through time. So when I work with a lot of nonprofits around, okay, what would segmentation look like? I usually start with the 3 basic criteria that you can start thinking about segmenting your donor database. So of course, the number 1 is going to be around also the amount of donations they'll be giving. So yes, it's important to treat some of your donors that have been more significant from a financial perspective differently, because the investment of time that you will take with these donors will have a much higher return from a dollar perspective. So number 1, you can segment your database based on your major gifts or important gifts versus your maybe middle tier. So those that are like almost there. So let's say if your limit is $1,000 for a major gift. And I know for some organizations that's small potatoes, but for some it's maybe more significant. But what about those that are like 750, 800? They're like getting there. So you still need to treat that second tier a bit more closely or more personalized to get them to switch into the top tier. And of course, that doesn't mean that we're ignoring the third tier. It's just that we might have more mass mailing or mass emailing type campaigns that will still recognize their support, but in a lesser resource intensive way. So number 1, money. Number 2, it could be around the frequency of their gifts. So a donor that has maybe given smaller donations, but has given to you every year consistently for 15 years is someone that you need to keep closer to you and recognize more than, let's say, someone who, they gave a $2,000 gift, but they gave it once a couple of years ago. So taking into consideration the frequency of the gifts is another way to segment, to be able to give more importance or to invest more energy, I would say, into certain groups that have shown that they're committed so that you can really encourage and support that commitment and loyalty that they've shown to your organization. The third one that I usually recommend is also from a recency. So like the date of their last donation. So kind of like dating once again, if someone's given you 5 years ago, or if you've been on a date with someone 5 years ago, it'd be kind of strange to just randomly be like, hey, want to go on a date today? Like, what's going on? And be like, oh, wait, what's this creep? You know? So for nonprofits, like you have to make sure to, of course, maintain that relationship over time, but understand that even if they made a major gift, if it was 5 years ago, you have some relationship building to do before you'll make the ask. So segmenting your database based on like cold, warm, and hot, for example, will allow you to do different strategies and be more logical and also have much more higher conversion rate with your strategies if you're respecting where those donors are on the timeline. So those are like some of the factors that I think need to be taken into consideration when you're segmenting your donor database.
Made a bunch of notes as you were talking. And I love the idea that you just kind of like ended on, and I'm going to call that like personalization. If you can connect with somebody and they feel like you understand them, you have a better chance of convincing them, whatever it happens to be. Car salespeople are amazing at this, like the ones that are really good. They really understand your need and they kind of like push you into like, or try to anyways, like get you into the next car. Katherine and I were talking about cars earlier. You know, like if you can create that connection, you build rapport. They like you more than they did before, even if they really liked you before. So, you know, I think building rapport, having the personalization is really key. And part of what you were talking about was connecting with people that are more longer term donors. So I'm going to call them like the loyal donor. If we want to give them like a persona of some kind, right? Reach out to them, find out why have they been giving you for 4 years, 5 years, 10 years. Understand what is their connection with your organization. We know that people that donate to a cause typically have a very personal reason why. Either they were affected by something or they know somebody that was affected by something, and that's why they give to the causes that are really close to them, right? So if you can really understand why they're giving, you can tailor the messages. You can weave in stories that kind of evoke some kind of emotional reaction with them, that they understand the care, the impact that your organization is having, so that they're, even if it's $50 a year, that they understand what their money is actually doing. You don't just hit them up every 3 months for a donation. You can't do that. It's not going to sustain.
No, and the whole idea of personalization is that people give and they like feeling seen by everyone. Like everyone wants to be that special snowflake, right? Like it's still a big part of the psychology that we need to realize and to implement into our strategies. If I don't feel but you know who I am, then I don't feel special. I don't feel seen. And I think that is a very important strategy. And of course, there's the caveat of like donors also need to understand that sometimes these organizations are dealing with many different donors and stuff. So there has to be a balance between the two of also, we have to recognize that not all organizations have the same capacities and resources to be able to personalize it as much. But there are some very simple things that organizations can do from the beginning. Start creating these automation systems using different automation tools that can just allow you to tag different donors into different categories. Just like monthly donors, send them monthly donor emails. That's a very big category that people will still feel that you're recognizing their type of donation. Or you can have different fields that are automated, like you've been giving for X amount of years. These are things that, depending on your CRM, of course, I hope you're not using Excel, but hey, I know that many of people are still using spreadsheets, but you can still have these things that, even if there's like a couple fields that you decide to focus on, that can make people feel special. I'll give a little personal example of what not to do, or what's happened to me in the past where I was working at an animal shelter. I have a lot of animal shelter examples because I worked in the field for very long, and I was working there. I was an employee, I was a foster family, I was a volunteer. I was coming in like every day to help walk the dogs, and I was just very involved. I even did my own fundraisers for them. Like, I was very actively involved in the shelter. And I remember getting a phone call, and it was obviously a company that had been hired to do fundraising for them by phone. And they just did their regular spiel to me as if I didn't know what the shelter was. And I was just like, I work there, right? Like, I know all of these stories. And I just felt so insulted almost that like I hadn't been tagged as like, this person is an employee. She's been here for 4 years. So I didn't donate to that campaign. Like, doesn't mean I didn't donate to the shelter in other situations, but that lack of recognition of how involved I had been was hurtful. And so it made me less likely to give. So if you have that in mind, when you're going to be taking notes in your database of your volunteers, make sure that these tags are there. Are they also a volunteer? Are they an employee? Are they a foster home? Making sure that your different sets of data are talking to each other so that they're not separate. And this is something that there are digital tools that are so much help, like so much more easy to do now than when I was working there 10 years ago, that it's so easy that if you're not doing it, then it's almost more insulting now than it was before.
For sure. One of our clients, they're a national organization, and they support a bunch of like international crisis related things that happen. If there's like floods in whatever country, this, that, whatever, they raise money, they send it there, they send support, all that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, there's all kinds of crises that happen, right? Imagine if you could tag people when they donate to that specific cause, the category of that cause. So was it a cause about people? Was it a cause about food? Was it a cause about shelter, right? And then you can tailor those messages. Possibly, maybe you have some generic messages that you send, but every once in a while you can send something out that's very specific to that because they donated to that cause, and that is something that's really close to them, right? And that's how you can hyper-personalize these things.
100%. And I have a similar example of a client I worked with recently who also does international cooperation. They noticed that there was a lot of influx of new donors around the big earthquake that had happened in Haiti. And they noticed that a lot of those donors never gave to any other cause after. Like, they were there because of that cause. So had they been tagged in, let's say, anything that happened with Haiti in the future, they just were targeted for that, I'm sure they would have seen a higher retention rate. So once again, you can choose the types of categories you want to focus on. Is it going to be the type of, let's say, they only give to earthquakes versus they don't give to tsunamis? I don't think that's going to be a thing, but hey, we could tag a campaign based on that. You could also base it on the region. If it's more in the Caribbean, maybe it's because they're actually from the diaspora. They come from that region. For them, they have family there. That's why they're giving to that cause. And you might want to do country specific. You can really go deep into segmenting to have all these different categories. That doesn't mean that you're not going to send your fundraising campaigns to people who've never given to an earthquake before. But it's just that you might have a targeted message to those who have specifically given to similar campaigns in the past of like, this is a cause that you donate to in the past. We are asking for your support again. And then people feel, I did give to that cause. Yes, I would like to support it again. So it's all about, like you said, about targeting in specific groups and personalizing the messaging just a little bit sometimes to make them feel more seen.
Okay, so you mentioned before about CRM
Yes.
and you mentioned Excel or spreadsheets. When I was working at one of my past employment places, one of my tasks was understanding anti-spam legislation. I went around, I met with all the departments. Do you have any lists? Do you have any lists? I think there were close to 20 lists across the organization. A whole bunch of them were in spreadsheets and stuff. So I totally understand, like, people might not have the access to money or the tech savviness to be able to implement a CRM, customer or client relationship management tool. I'd like to call it a DRM, like a donor relationship management. Nobody knows what DRM is, digital rights management. Whole other thing, whole other podcast. We could talk about that. But when we think about tools, right, there's some big players in the market that have been out there for decades. It's hard to switch off those platforms. But I think a lot of the folks that listen to my podcast here are kind of smaller organizations, a lot smaller budgets. Are there any tools that you would recommend for segmenting, maybe stewardship to help with the fundraising?
Yeah, for sure. So there's a lot of platforms. I think the one that's really been up and coming in the recent years that is very accessible and easy to use is Cefi. If you don't have a CRM, this can be a very easy first step into just starting to manage your donors. All of them will be in one place. It's free to use. Of course, it's one of those platforms that instead of charging the nonprofits, they ask the donors to give a tip or to add a percentage of the donation that's going to go to cover the cost. But it's optional. So it still keeps the costs of the technology very accessible to nonprofits and kind of asks donors to support and add on instead. So I think that if you need a CRM to start, that's a great place. It's definitely not focused as much on the CRM component. It's much more on getting people to donate. So you'll get your donor like management platform at the same time. But if you're just using Excel, like use it for now, like there's the in between. One of the tools that I found the most helpful, I actually just set it up for a client recently, is if you don't know Zapier yet, or I don't know if anyone else pronounces it differently, I say Zapier, it's really allowing you to connect different platforms together. So I'll give a concrete example that I literally just set up for my client yesterday, where he uses Zapier to connect Zephy, which is the CRM we're just mentioning, and his MailChimp account. We set up a thing so that whenever someone makes a donation, there's a zap. So there's a little command that is sent out that will add that person's email and information to his MailChimp account. But what we made is that I wanted only the new donors. I didn't want people that were already in the list, because what I was hoping to do with that zap or that connection was to send new donors a specific email series, because then they maybe not know the organization. As someone who's been giving for 15 years, I'm not going to send them like, hey, do you know this organization? Like, that would be kind of strange. But what I wanted them to get is a specific email onboarding series so that they will feel warmed up to the cause, so that when I ask them for that second donation in a couple months, they've already had some chance to get to know the organization in the meantime. So with these tools, what it allowed me to do is have a command of like, okay, someone makes a donation, they get sent to the database. But if they're already an existing contact, nothing happens. This is for this command. Of course, there's tons of commands that I could do of sending an automatic thank you email to everyone, or if they do this, this happens. So it's all of these amazing automation tools that can be set up by yourself or by people like us that could help you create these systems so that they're kind of working on their own, but people don't necessarily think about that. When they get their automatic emails, it still feels personal. Like, hey, thank you so much. You just made your first donation to our organization. Like, oh, how did they know I was the first? You know what I mean? It just makes people feel, which is we know deep down, like we know there's automation tools when people say like, comment this and I'll send you the guide on Instagram. We know it's automated. We're not silly, but it still makes our lives easier, makes us still feel more like a personal connection. So this is just one example of something that you can easily set up. And Zapier is great because it connects with so many tools. So if these two platforms don't talk to each other automatically, Zapier can make those connections. So those would be maybe two of the main things that I would recommend.
Yeah, I love automations. I love connecting systems. I'm going to tell you that it's called Zapier. That's how I pronounce it, because you create zaps.
I know, but I find Zapier sounds
It's all good. Doesn't matter. But it connects, I think, over 5,000 different platforms together, right? So for some of our clients, what we've done when there's a new contact created, these, I'm going to call them like onboarding email journeys. So 3 or 4 emails over the course of maybe 10 days, 12 days, something like that, so that they understand more about what you're doing, the impact you have, that kind of thing. But also what we're using it for is when there's a new blog post or a new news release, you can use this. And if your site's WordPress, for example, have it automatically create a a campaign that you can then go edit, never have it actually send it out automatically from something like that because you want to review it, but you can have it automatically do that. So you don't have to go and copy and paste stuff and put images. You can just automate all that and save yourself like a whole whack of time. Zephy is a free platform. We're partners with Zephy, so I've got a little bit of the back end there, but they worked out a deal with Stripe where Stripe covers all the fees. So even if the donor doesn't say that they're going to cover that fee, it's still free. So that's their model, how they're making money is anybody that says that they're going to check it off, that money stays with Zephy to help like run the platform and all that. So it's like super, super awesome in that way. There are some of these donation platforms out there that you can actually build smart forms with. So for example, Katherine, if you made a donation to this organization for, let's say, $50, the next time that they send you that campaign, you can, from the organization side, they can set it up where it'll automatically increase the default values by 10% or 15%. So it'd say $55 and be like, yeah, I think I did that last time. Okay. And just by like leveraging some kind of tech, you can actually start increasing the donations over time, right? You don't want to keep increasing it every single time, but you can figure out when to do that. And I think it's a very smart move to have a CRM in place that can detect that kind of stuff and help you make some smart decisions.
Well, even just having your donor data, obviously maybe not your credit card information necessarily, but ideally, if you could even say everything's there, all you have to do is click donate, simplifying the process. That's what stores do, like Amazon, just like you can do one-click purchases. So why can't we do this for donations where it just simplifies the process of like, okay, you've already given, here's information, double check, it's all good. Oh yeah, that's so much easier. Like it's already filled out. The number of times where like I have to fill it out and then I have to change pages and click this and it's just, we live in a very fast-paced world. So the faster you can get people to just have it done for them, the more likely they are to succeed in making a donation to your organization. And also, if you can personalize, like after a certain amount, let's say that you would recommend the next time asking for a monthly donation instead. You can personalize your ask of, let's say they made a donation of $120 last year. You can maybe ask, hey, would you be comfortable with making a $12 a month donation instead? That way it's easier to manage for your budget. And also it gives us the stability that is required for nonprofits to actually invest in our longer term projects. So I love the idea of personalized forms. And really, this is where segmentation can be so helpful. Once you understand who is in your database, then you can target them for different things. And even if, God forbid, you're using just your Excel spreadsheets, it's, of course, a lot more manual work. I've done it for many organizations that had like 10 years of data, but in 10 different spreadsheets. And I collated it into one huge spreadsheet. And I was able to see, okay, this Karen here has given for 6 years. So, she's going to be segmented as this. And then once we had all that data in spreadsheets, we were still able to tag them manually into their email management tool of like, these are our category 2 or a 2-star. You can still do it manually if you don't feel comfortable or don't have the technology. So there are things that you can do to really support your stewardship that can really help build stronger relationships with your donors.
One little, I'm going to call it a pro tip here. If you're using spreadsheets, whether it's Google Sheet or Excel or whatever, pivot tables will be your best friend because then you can create other lists based on tags, based on dates of last donation, based on whatever it happens to be. So you can kind of do it. But yeah, Katherine, you're shaking your head. Reach out to one of us. We could probably help you with the pivot tables if you need some support around that.
100%.
Absolutely. Fantastic. I think there have been some really, really great insights here today. I hope that people listening to this episode have gotten at least one kind of golden nugget to walk away with to help them in their donor stewardship fundraising capacity in some way there. If anybody wants to reach out to you, Katherine, what do they need to do?
They need to do a little rain dance outside and call for the fundraising queen. No, I'm kidding. Of course, I'm very active on LinkedIn. Katherine Lacefield. You can find me. I accept all requests unless they're really sketchy. And I love answering people's questions directly on LinkedIn. If not, on my website, justbecause.consulting, you can find a way to book an exploration call with me. I love just kind of like what we did here of like, okay, what's your problem? Let's find solutions. My exploration calls are not sales calls. They're really just like, let's touch base and try to give you some advice in that 30 minutes. And if you still want to continue after it, then we can talk business. But also you'll be able to find my own podcast, Just Because Podcast, where I also give advice on fundraising more specifically, but also this whole idea of collaboration between organizations and how you can build up your nonprofit. So LinkedIn and my website, justbecause.consulting.
Thanks again so much for joining, Katherine. It's been great having you here on the Nonprofit Digital Success Podcast. To everybody listening, if you want any of the links to some of the platforms or things that we talked about, or to Katherine's LinkedIn or website or whatever, just head over to our podcast page at nonprofitdigitalsuccess.com. Click on this episode for all the details. And until next time, keep on being successful.